Thank you all for joining. It's been a long day so far. I hope everyone's having fun. Yeah, thumbs up. Sweet. So today's talk is going to be about generative AI, and we'll use a little bit of Firebase and Flutter because we are in the Firebase and Flutter conference. But I also want to make this very interactive talk. So I'll be asking questions. Feel free to raise your hands. Don't be shy. Feel free to shout out stuff. It's all good. We're just in an informal setting, okay? So I want to make it as interactive as possible. And we'll also be looking at Project IDX. Now, you've heard of this term being thrown since morning, and we have shown it in some flavors. I want this to be a talk where we have enough time to go into the weeds. And please feel free to ask questions towards the end. We'll have time on Project IDX, on what are the talks we've covered, but let's keep it interactive. Okay, so quick intro about me. So my name is Prakhar. I'm proud of this animation. I'm an early engineer on the Project IDX team. I've been a software engineer at Google for around 7 years. And I'm really passionate about open source, developer tools. I've spent largely my career in Firebase and recently moved to the Project IDX team. And believe it or not, this is my first time in Europe. And I'm having an amazing time. So thanks everyone for joining and to this staff for selecting my talk. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? So today, I want to focus on building a real app, right, that some of us might use. And it's a very simple app with where a user can input a task or a goal, and you can use AI to help you output some of the subtasks related to that query. Now, amongst all of us who are like programmers, software engineers, raise hands, right? I'm sure we all do this on a daily basis. The PM or somebody gives us a task, we break it down into smaller tasks, right? But this is very helpful for other walks of life as well. So here, for example, in this app, I'm asking this super hard question of how do I start writing a memoir? Memoir is basically like a diary or an autobiography, and it gives me these tasks, these subtasks. Choose a topic, gather your materials, etc. Right? And this is a nice way of breaking down a very complex problem, which is of writing a memoir, into smaller problems. So let's take a quick, like a live demo. Let me zoom this out. Okay, sweet. 1 second. Yeah. Okay. Can everybody see the screen? Is the font readable? Thumbs up. No. So is that a nope on the tech code or on the right side, on the preview? Both? Amazing, nice. Code, yes, no? One more? Zoom in. Is the code okay now? Okay, sweet. Okay, so before I continue, quick question. So to the Flutter or Firebase developers in the audience, what editors are you using? VS Code, raise hands. Oh, wow, amazing, okay. JetBrains, okay. Vim, Emacs. Nice. Okay, so here's what we have in Project IDX. Looks very much like Vim, right? I'm kidding, of course. This is meant to be, we use VS Code open source, and we want developers to feel at home in Project IDX. Obviously, asking a developer to change their ID is a huge task. I wouldn't do it, right? And we all love our tools. We're all tied to our tools. And so the idea here is that once you log in, you are immediately familiar with what you already know. No need to learn new things. So for example, as you saw, I can hit Command-Shift-P, do editor zoom in, right, to zoom in, zoom out. And there's also extensions. Similarly, I'm sure you have extensions installed, whether it's a theme or, so if you go here, whether it's a theme, whether it's a plugin, a language server, whatever, right? All of those extensions are enabled. So if I search for theme, you'll see that I have so many themes available that I can install. So all very familiar with your local MacBook or whatever that you're using to develop. Now let's do a quick demo. So one thing you'll see is like in some of the other demos, we've talked about the web version of Project IDX. But this is all hush-hush. We are just telling this at the conference now. This is not public yet. But we are very soon launching Android and iOS emulators in the cloud so that you can use them right from your laptop. There were questions earlier on, do I need a Mac for iOS? No. So all you need is a browser, but you can build Android and iOS apps and run them right in the IDE. Right? And so I want to do a quick demo of this. Can anybody shout like a quick task that we can test the model? So one thing I've been using is, I want to give a tech talk at a conference, right? Very meta, but let's see. At a tech conference, let's say, what does it suggest? So I hit enter, and hopefully it resolves, and it says, okay, choose a topic, sure. Research your topic, of course. Write your presentation slides and practice your delivery. This is my practicing my delivery. Create a handout for your audience. Sorry, no handouts, guys. Test your presentation equipment and make sure it's working properly. And then this is also a tip. Make sure to arrive early to the conference and check in with the organizers. Now, one cool thing here is that let us say I want to say, how do I research for a topic? Or how do I write my presentation slides? I can click on this button, and it will drill down into that one. And then you can go as deep as you like, right? OK, so one audience question, and then we jump to the slides. Can anybody suggest a fun? Learn archery. Nice, that's a good one. I want to learn archery. Okay, find a qualified instructor, purchase a beginner's bow and arrows, learn the proper stance and form, practice your form regularly, have fun. How does that sound? Cool. Before we go any further, I just want to do a very quick demo. I said this is Flutter, and it's running Android and iOS, right? And this is actually full iOS. It's not a responsive view of a website or anything. And for example, if I can scroll down, this is actually iOS running here, right? Similarly, on Android, this is also like a full app, like a full emulator that's running. So let's do one thing. Let's change this green. Green happens to be one of my favorite colors. I wish I could have worn it today. But can anybody shout a color that they like? Sorry? Amber. OK, let's see if that is there. It is. Nice. So if I hit save, and the color instantly changes, right? You see how fast that cycle was? There was any other color. Somebody shouted orange. Save. And it changed to orange. Let's do something else which is even clearly visible. Blue, for example. Right? And so all of these hot reloading abilities, debugging that you're used to as Flutter developers today is available on Project IDX. And again, all of this is launching very soon. Currently, we only have web, but Android and iOS is where it's at, in my opinion, because that's what Flutter was designed for. So it works really well. OK, so let's jump quickly to the talk. So all the app, if anybody liked the app and they want to see what the code is and how does it work, this is a QR code that I'll be sharing later on also. It links to my public GitHub repository where you can go clone the code and have fun with it. OK, let's continue. OK, I showed the demo. OK, and for those of you who have not yet had a chance to try Project IDX or in a wait list and it's taking too long to get it, just for this conference, we have a special link for you. Please take a screenshot, fill it out, and within today or by end of tomorrow, you should have an access to Project IDX so that you can try and have fun with it. All good? Sweet. So what's our agenda for today? So our agenda for today is basically, we'll quickly talk about generative AI and LLMs. We'll talk about how we can use generative AI using the Palm API, which is a cloud API from Google Cloud. We'll see how we can use Firebase Extensions to use it very easily in our app without any setup required. And finally, we'll go into the code for the Flutter app, because that's what you're here for. You're Flutter developers, right? Cool. So LLMs and generative AIs. How many of you have used any kind of LLM generative AI, which means Bard, ChatGPT, any open source model? Sweet. So everybody already knows what this is, right? True story. For planning my 3-day trip at Prague, I used Bard to come up with an itinerary, and it's been awesome. It basically gave me all the points to visit, and that's what I've been using. So what are LLMs? So LLMs, the way I would like to put it, is basically a sophisticated autocomplete, right? It's autocomplete, but with steroids. So for example, if given an input text, you can lead a horse to water, the LLM is most likely to, oh, I should present full screen, sorry, my bad. OK, this is much better. This is how it was meant to be shown. OK, so when you give an input text, you can lead a horse to water. The LLMs most statistically will answer with, but you can't make it drink, right? And one could argue that, oh, it's just autocomplete. What can I build with it? But there are tons of applications. So for example, generating poetry, short stories, converting structured data to free-form text, extracting summaries from free-form text, generating code. I'm sure most of you have used it in some form. Translation, obviously, and building a chatbot, because why not, right? And there are other examples and more details at this link. But let's quickly go a little bit into the LLM concepts. So at a high level, like I said, the LLM just takes one input. And one thing that makes LLMs really different from the past few years of machine learning improvements that we've seen is it doesn't require any ML expertise. You don't need to collect large data set. You don't need to train a model. All it takes is you describe what you want to do, and it completes and it gives you an answer, right? So it takes an input and gives you an output. And so here, for example, I have this very simple input: write a 4-line poem about puppies and Android phones, make sure it rhymes, and actually came up with a good, very nice poem that I could put on a t-shirt and wear, right? So that's pretty cool. But one challenge is that given this, all it does, it takes as an input, that one line of input that we give it is very important, right? So here's an example of what is a bad prompt. The bad prompt is, the sky is. And in some cases, the model will say blue, but it'll also keep rambling on to something else. It'll say the sky is blue on a clear day, on a cloudy day, blah, 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 right? I'm not sure this is what you wanted when you asked it the sky is. A better prompt is, complete the sentence, colon, the sky is, and then it completes it to so beautiful today, right? So the idea here is that the prompt that you give is very, very important, because that's the only input to the model, or one of the most important inputs to the model that is in your hands. Now, within prompting, there are two kinds of prompting. And one such prompting is zero-shot prompting. Now, zero-shot prompting is basically a way where we tell the model to complete the prompt without any extra knowledge. It knows what the patterns it has recognized based on the input data, and it uses that to complete the output. So for example, here I'm saying, classify the text into neutral, negative, or positive. And the text is, I think the vacation is okay. Sentiment, fill in the blank, and the answer comes back as neutral. So here, only the model has this input, and it has obviously trained on that large repository of data, and it comes back with neutral. The other way is few-shot prompting. Now, few-shot prompting is where we take advantage of the fact that large language models are incredibly good at recognizing and replicating patterns in text data, right? So the idea is to send the LLM a text pattern, and it learns to complete the code. So for example, here we are saying you can convert Python to JavaScript, right? We gave it a few examples: Python code hello world, JavaScript hello world, for loop in Python, for loop in JavaScript. And if the user wants to give some Python code, then the LLM would complete the JavaScript code. So here you can see we've given it two examples, which is the few-shot prompting, that in practice will behave better than zero-shot prompting. Okay, so now we've learned LLMs, we've learned how to prompt, but how do I use it? So to use LLMs, one of the very easy way to do that is to use large language models using the PaLM API. Now, the PaLM API is a GCP API by Google Cloud Project, and it's very simple to use and build applications with it. So you can build your own ChatGPT, your own Bard, your any other way of, or the listed app is what we use in this case, for example. And now there are two APIs that PaLM API has. It has a chat API and a text API. So let's quickly see what are the differences and what we'll be using for our demo, right? So the text API is designed for singleton applications, which means you ask a question, you get back a response, and that's it. So it's ideal for tasks that can be completed within one response from the API. So examples here are text completions, the poem one, for example, summarizing data or classifying text. These are like perfect examples for the text API, whereas the chat API is designed for interactive multi-turn applications or conversations. And the reason this is important is in a chat, you need the context of previous chats. If I'm talking about Prague, and 5 steps later I'm talking about what's the weather like, it obviously means I'm talking about Prague and not anything else. And so that's where the context of the conversation is very important, and that's where you would use something like the chat API. So examples of this are customer support bots, interactive tutors, and chatbots. Okay, so in our application, so given this, can anybody guess which of these APIs we'll use for the listed app? I heard text. Yes, text is the right answer. Because we are not chatting with any bot, we don't have any context. It's very simply a text API is what we'll use for our for our listed app. Now we know the API that we have to use. We know PaLM API. How do I use it? So that's where Firebase Extensions come into play. I'm sure you've heard Firebase Extensions quite a few times since morning. So I won't spend a lot of time on it. But basically, PaLM is a REST API. And you might argue, I've used n number of REST APIs. Why do I need a Firebase extension to use a REST API? And yes, I agree. That's a very valid question, right? And the challenge here is there are 3 benefits of using Firebase extension. The first benefit is, now let us say you want to call this PaLM API, or this REST API from your mobile phone or web app. Where will you put the API key? On the phone. What will a hacker do? They will take the API key and run you a $1,000 bill, right? And so now you need to save your API key. You protect it on your backend. You now have to build a service that stores the API key and then does all of that management. But instead, with Firebase extensions, it provides you the API endpoints that are secure and extremely configurable to use. And one other plus point is that it also gives you API endpoints that are secured by AppCheck. What app check does, it ensures that if this is my backend, this is my front end, I want to make sure that only my front end is calling my backend. No other random app is calling my backend because I'm paying for my backend. So I want to make sure that only the clients that I allow are using the backend. Okay, so I think hopefully you're all convinced that Firebase extension is the way to go in this case. And the other thing is Firebase extension makes it very easy to securely interact with the Palm API, right? So what I've done is I've gone to the Firebase marketplace, I've typed Palm at the top, and it has given me these 5 extensions that I can install. And the one that I've circled with the green is basically the one that we'll be using, which is called Call Palm API Securely. And there are a few others that you can take a look additionally. Okay, so let's dive into the code, right? So the first thing we need to do is deploy the function, right? So we have to have the backend ready. To deploy the function, it's very simple. You go click on the install button in Firebase console. The extension will install. It'll ask you a few questions, which are basically permissions. Click on the big blue boxes. And once everything is installed, this is where you should end up. Now, once the extension is installed, it is telling you 2 things. One, it is telling you all the cloud functions that it has provisioned. And in this case, it has 3 cloud functions that it has provisioned. So a post function, a get models function, and a get model function. In this case, we only care about the post function because what that does is what completes is the text API, like we discussed earlier. And it then also very kindly gives us some sample code. Hey, this is how you use it. In case you don't know how to use the Palm API, this is how you can call it, right? Now this code, if people can see, can anybody guess what language this code is in? Sorry? No, that's not Dart. Yes, JavaScript, TypeScript, yes, right? But in our case, we are writing Flutter. And so all we'll need to do basically to use this API is convert these 2 lines of text into Dart, and then we can run to town, right? Okay, so let's, finally, if everything is up and running, you should see 3 functions deployed, 1 for each API, like I said. So the first one is called get models, next is called get model, and the third one is called the post, and this is the one we need. Now, pay close attention to some of the few things here. So the name is called ext palm secure backend post, which will come in handy. And the second thing to note is where is this deployed? This is deployed in US West 2. Obviously, you can deploy it in other regions that Firebase has, so Europe region. Okay, so let's set up the API. Now, initially I had the slides where I had screenshots of code, but that seems like a very boring way to navigate code. Let's just go to IDX, and then we'll navigate the code together. Okay, so the first thing I have is the Firebase options page. It's very simply scaffolded using Flutter Fire, and it has all my configuration. Please don't take photos of this one, but let's jump to the API. This is where the meat is, right? And so here what we are doing is, these 3 variables are directly from the previous file. So I'm setting a region, which is US West 2. I'm setting an instance ID, Palm Secure Backend, and I'm calling the function name as ext-palm secure backend post, which is exactly what we saw here. So exactly this thing here. And yes, this does seem a bit convoluted. I could just have like one long string. So the next thing we are doing is we have this method, right? And all this is doing is, if you see, it is taking the prompt and passing it to the Palm API. And also, this is again copy pasted from these lines of code. So nothing new, very straightforward. It's basically saying, I think this is much nicer font. So you can say generate text bison 001, which is the name of the model. Give me a prompt, give me an optional temperature. Now temperature is one of those things, like I said, an additional input that you can pass to an LLM model. And very simply, this is a very high level overview. So temperature is a value between 0 and 1. And the higher the value, the more creative the model is. And for a value of 0, the model is more deterministic, which means that if you ask it the same question every time, it is most likely to respond the same answer every time. But if the text temperature is 1, for example, it will be creative. And in some cases, you want lower value. In some cases, you want a higher value. For example, in case where I'm saying generate a poem, I want it to be creative and generate different poems every single time, right? Okay, so once I have the request parameter, it's very simply just these 3 lines of code. So in comes the prompt, I convert it to the params, and then I call my Firebase function. So this is the code that is needed to call the backend, right? So what's next? So we have covered, the next part is basically prompts. And this is where our quick tutorial on prompting helps. So let me quickly go through this piece, and I think it'll be helpful. So let's talk about generating the prompt, right? Now, like I said, there's two ways, zero-shot prompting and few-shot prompting. In this case, we'll use few-shot prompting. What does few-shot prompting mean? Give some examples to the model so that it can perform better, so that it knows what to do. So I am a programmer, which means I'm incredibly lazy. Rather than writing so many examples line by line, what I've done is I have a very simple code that does this. So there's a prefix, which means which has you want to. The next is here's a list of tasks that you might need to complete for that activity. And the last one is something additional to consider. So for example, the first example is go camping. So the prefix will be you want to go camping, okay? Here's a list of tasks that you might need to complete for that activity. And here are some subtasks. For example, choose a campsite, pack clothing, bring a tent, etc. And here's my second example, which is plan a family vacation, choose a destination, make a packing list, etc. And then optionally a tip, right? And what I'm doing here is very simply, if we can just hop back into the code, you'll see here that I have these examples. So go camping, buy a house, plan a family vacation, apply for a job, let us say go on a first date. These are 5 examples that I've given the model based on which it generated, for example, the archery one that you posted, right? So all very straightforward. If you're wondering what the tip is, this one, I think in iOS, when we tried it, okay, never mind. When we tried in iOS, screenshot, you'll see here that there's this tip that it additionally gives you, and that's the last bit of the array. Okay, so let's quickly go through the code. I think I'm running out of time. And so in prompt builder, so this is where and this class, all it does, it takes those and constructs a huge prompt. Now, is one cool thing I wanted to show you. So I have IDEX AI here, and let's do clear. Now, let us say I give you this code, and we are on a team, and you check out this code, and you're like, okay, what does this class do? It'll be very cool if the AI could help me with it, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it, and I'm going to say explain the selected code in my editor, and let's see what it comes back with. So it says the selected code defines a class called prompt builder. It also has a method called construct prompt, which is used to construct the prompt. And this method takes a string as input and returns a string that. So basically, it tells you, it explains you the code that you might have been given from your teammate or you've read on GitHub. I can also ask questions, for example, around Flutter. How do I center a button? Or what is a stream builder class? All those kinds of questions are completely fair game. So once I have the prompt set up, the rest of it is very, very straightforward. As you can see, my UI programming skills are pretty poor. So it's just a list view with 2 buttons. So all you see here is basically a list view, right? And it sets the state, it calls the API, it sets the tasks from here, and then I have a very simply a list view, or a tasks and tip view. It has a task item, which is every item in the line. So let me click on something. It might be easier to dive in. And then it builds the tip from the text that you give it. And finally, here's the code for rendering the list. So all very straightforward. This is basically Flutter UI building 101 as far as Flutter apps are concerned. So I'm sure this is all very familiar to everyone. I think that's pretty much it. Now for the last slide, which generally is the hardest slide in giving a presentation, the thank you slide. I asked my trusty little friend, how do I create a thank you slide for the presentation? I think I followed it to the T. So thank you everyone for your time and attention. Here's a link to the GitHub URL. You can use this QR code. And there's also a tiny URL in case you want to check out the GitHub repository. That's it. Happy to take any questions.